The Wall Street crash of 1929 came down hard in Stoughton, Wisconsin. The town's largest employer, Stoughton Wagon Works, had to lay people off. Among them was a 49-year-old Norwegian immigrant. He had no formal education, no savings to fall back on, and no other job waiting for him. What would you do in a situation like that? Would you have gone down to the local pub and drink your sorrows away? Well, this man didn't. He went home and started painting flowers. A few years later, his flowers and his art appeared on plates and furniture all across America. They were even featured in Vogue. This episode of 200 Norwegians is about Per Lysne, the father of Rosemaling in America. In this episode, I'm definitely gonna talk less and listen more, because this is a topic I have modest knowledge about, to say the least. And I suspect that some of you listening are in the same boat. So let's start from 10,000 feet. What is Rosemaling? Here is Patti Goke from St. Cloud, Minnesota. She has been painting Rosemaling for over 35 years. She's a Vesterheim Gold Medalist and the editor of Vesterheim Rosemaling newsletter. If there were a black belt in Rosemaling or even a PhD, she'd have it.
I think of Rosemaling, and my definition would be that it's a painted art form from Norway, but more specifically from specific regional areas of Norway, but nothing north of Nord-Trøndelag.
Hmm. And what makes Rosemaling Rosemaling?
What? That's a great question. I haven't thought about that for a long time. What makes Rosemaling Rosemaling? I suppose it is the motifs that are used. And the motifs used will be different for each of the regional areas, but most of them have in common some sort of flower, and a lot of them use some type of stylized tulip. Um, and also the scrolls. And some of the scrolls are very elaborate, based in Baroque or Rococo, and others are very, very simple, such as what you would find in Nordfjord or Viksdal.
And how long back does it go? You mentioned Rococo and Barocco, so I assume it
Yeah.
doesn't go all the way back to the Viking era or anything.
No, no. I think the first rose mauling, something that, well, in rose mauling, the term itself is relatively new. I think that came about from the Husfleet. But decorative painting that we would call rose mauling today would go, I would say probably the earliest would be 1690s.
Hmm. And Rosemaling, for those of my listeners who don't speak Norwegian, means literally rose painting.
Yeah, but it's not rose the flower. I think it's rosa, meaning decorative.
Oh, there you go. I was not aware of that.
Well, what do I know?
Well, Patti Goke knows a lot, and we'll hear more from her later. Another person who knows a great deal about Rosemaling and even more about Per Lysne is Håkon Lysne. Håkon Lysne and Per Lysne are not related, but they both come from the same place, Lærdal. Håkon Lysne is also president of the local historical society there. According to him, Lærdal wasn't a typical Rosemaling region, but it was a place that many people, including many Rosemalers, traveled through. Can you tell me a little bit about the society that Per Lysne was born into 150 years ago?
Well, I can tell you a bit first about the place where we are located. Lærdal is located in the western part of Norway. We are not a typical western part. We are located in the eastern part of West Norway, and we are in we have what we call Sognefjorden. It stretches from the coastline and into Lærdal. It's the fjord, world's second largest fjord, still as I remember. And we have always been a kind of communication center from between the east and west with the roads and the sea. When Per Lysne was born, he was born in 1880. It was still a society of farming. Well, we didn't have any, at his time, we didn't have any industry in Lærdal, but we have a famous salmon river called Lærdal River with a lot of tourists in summertime. We had hotels and we had hotels and persons who should be transported across the valley and over to the eastern part. So we were very influenced by the eastern part from the other side of the mountain, the eastern part, Hallingdal or Telemark. So I think Per Lysne and his father, they have studied this very closely, I believe.
This Hans Lysne is referring to here is of course Rosemaling. Telemark and Hallingdal were important Rosemaling regions during the peak of National Romanticism. National Romanticism was a cultural and historical period in the 19th century marked by a growing interest in folk culture. Across Europe, artists and painters and writers tried to define what made their own culture unique and distinct from the rest. The movement was arguably particularly strong in Norway, where it coincided with the political struggle for independence. Painters depicted landscapes of fjords and peasants casually wearing bunads as they worked. Writers explored the lives and hardship of the working poor. And traditional folk art, such as Rosemaling, gained greater recognition. This cultural trend probably benefited Per Lysne and his dad.
From he was 15 years old, I think, 1895 or around that, he was helping his father with painting. They were painting houses, decorating houses inside. They were also doing works with Rosemaling when the weather was really harsh outside or winter time. They were sitting inside decorating chairs, especially three-legged chairs, special chair, plates, bowls, cupboards, and things like that by Rosemaling. That is what we know about him before he emigrated.
Before we travel to America with Per Lysne, we should, however, say a word or two more about Per Lysne's father. Although he appears mostly as a mentor in this story, he was very much an artist in his own right. In Lærdal, they called him Storemåleren, the great painter. At his prime, his works were exhibited from Bergen, Norway, to Paris, France.
He painted the altarpiece in the main church of Lærdal, Tønjum Church. The motive is Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. So that's a very beautiful one. That was painted in 1880, I think.
And then at some point, he gets invited to the World Fair in Paris. How did that come about?
He was in the Bergen exhibition in Bergen 1898. I won a medal in Bergen, and after that he was invited to Paris in the World Expedition in Paris in 1900, and was won also a prize there. But I don't know what he had brought with him to that expedition. I know that in 98 he had a trunk. We still have that trunk that was painted. We still have that trunk in Lærdal.
And speaking of trunks, or more precisely, emigrant chests, in the early 1900s, Per Lysne was a married man, and he and his wife decided to pack their emigrant chests and leave for America. Do we know why they emigrated to America? And was it common to emigrate to America from Lærdal?
That was very common. That was very common to emigrate, and many people emigrated. He went with his family, and 3 years before he emigrated, his brother Anders had emigrated to America, and he settled down in a town called Stoughton in Wisconsin, not far from Madison. You know, many Norwegian went to that area, and Per Lysne in 1906 he was married and he got a son. I don't know if that was that year or the year after, and he emigrated with his wife and the son in 1907, and they came to Stoughton in Dane County, where his brother was. And why did he emigrate? It was said that there's no future for me in Lærdal. I've read there's no future for me. When he was really young, he always wanted, or he preferred to work with the machinery and tools. I don't know why he said that. Of course, he was young, probably, but there was no job like that for him in Norway.
In the US, there were, however, new job opportunities.
Well, Stoughton it was a very small town in the mid of the 80s, 1850s. In 1858, it was a station town, so it was rapidly growing. And there was something special in that town. There were a lot of Norwegian residents, immigrants, or Scandinaves, and that was a factory for producing farming tools and horse wagon and other wagons. That was established in 1865 and grew very rapidly. So when when Per came to Stoughton in 1907, this factory had about 1,800 to 1,000 employed, and Per Lysne got a job as a painter. He was painting and decorated these horse wagons. Probably, I don't know. I've never seen some of these, but there were also figures he was painting and he was drawing probably something in them. So that was the job he had until the Depression started. And in 1929, the company went bankrupt and he didn't have any job anymore. So what could he do? So the only thing he could, as I said before, was painting, decoration painting. So he had to find a new way of living for himself and his family at that time to provide his family. So he started painting again. I don't know if he had been painting in this period, probably in his spare time. I don't know. Probably he has been Rosemaling, I don't know. But he started painting trunks, chairs, wooden plates, and spoon, and everything he could paint on. And something special. There was a special thing he did in this period when he was running for himself. He restored a lot of these trunks that the immigrants brought with them from Norway. And you know, this was big and small trunks transporting food and other things they needed to America. And this was in a bad shape, of course, from the vessels they had, the boat they had them transported by train or even ox wagons, covered wagons and things like that. So the painting was in a bad shape. So he restored. It said that he repainted about 600 of these Norwegian trunks.
Lysne didn't only restore trunks, he also, in many ways, restored an art form. An art form that had barely existed in the Norwegian American community and had been in a bit of a slump back home in Norway since the day of national romanticism in the 1800s. In the process of restoring the art form, he also built nothing short of a Rosemaling empire. Here is Patti Goke again.
I don't know what made him think that he, during the Depression, could sell decorative items when money was limited. But thank goodness he had big dreams, because it did establish him as some people have called him the father of Rosemaling in North America. And so he set up a little shop behind his home, where he did do painting, and he contracted with, I think, 3 or 4 local men from Stoughton to turn his plates and to um, make his trunks and his three-legged chairs. And it really started to become a cottage industry. And because of that, with that exposure, he also, I think, was quite clever in that he knew a bit how to market himself. I think he took advantage of opportunities of having his work or him put into newspaper articles or into um, uh, magazines. I know that he was in Vogue magazine and other magazines that were seen by people in larger areas. He was, what, maybe 2 hours or so, 3 hours from Chicago, where not as many Norwegians, but a lot of Swedes had settled in Chicago, and somehow his Norwegian morphed into what was called Swedish painting, just to appeal to the Swedish customers at Marshall Field's, kind of a upscale department store of the day.
Hmm.
And he was cranking these plates, and almost mass produced. And he ended up, I think, on the plates, he had 4 designs that he would use over and over and over. And he would put some saying about a smorgasbord, which I understand is more Swedish than Norwegian. So he was clever in in knowing what the people wanted. And I don't know how many thousands of plates he sold to Marshall Fields, and that's just in Chicago.
Hmm.
And I read somewhere that uh, every new bride in the Stoughton area would get a Pear Lisney plate for a
Hmm.
wedding gift.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of them out there.
Hmm. So you said he was clever. Was he almost a little bit sellout as well?
No. During the Depression, people had to do whatever they had to do. I admire him to be able to make a living at doing what he wanted.
Right. But I think some critics have said that Lysne adapted Rosemaling to the American taste rather than being true to his roots. Is that correct? I mean, like, did he?
Yes. Yes, you can see it in the use of the colors, his designs. I still don't know the impetus of his designs. Some people call it oos, and it's not like oos that I know. Even the early oos that goes back to the early 1800s. And it certainly isn't telemark. I would say we'd have to call it Lisneymaling. But I don't know if Rosemaling was starting to die in Norway. Why not? Maybe American taste at that time wouldn't have gravitated to it, to something more traditional. I don't know.
Hmm.
Don't you ever wish you could go into a time machine?
Right.
I would like to know.
Right. But I guess it's kind of the natural evolution of an art form that it does change when you put it in a new environment.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I would say for Rosemaling, in the last since the 1970s for sure, some of the biggest changes have come out of that Stoughton area
Hmm.
and making it a more of an American art form,
Wow.
getting a bit away from the roots.
Interesting. My understanding is that Lysne was also important as a mentor to a lot of up and coming artists. Is that correct? No.
I don't know what you mean by mentor. He certainly didn't take very many people under his wing and teach them. I think he taught his daughter-in-law's mother, a woman in near another woman, I can't remember her name, but another woman who painted like he did and signed her work Solhag, and she was from St. Paul. And those three or four women, which was also a change in the art form from Norway, from being a job or an occupation for men to becoming, I even hate to say it, but at the time it was a free time activity for women because women really were not making money at the time. Well, some did, but um, that he would work with those few people. And I have read that he would hold. So if you had a brush in your hand, he would hold it and then help you to guide you until you could get that stroke or the feel of the shape of the stroke correct. And then he would cut you loose.
Yeah, in closing, I want to ask you, what is the legacy of Per Lysne in America?
I think that the legacy is every Rose Mahler in America that is painting. We are all part of his legacy because I don't think if he had started painting, I don't think that the journey would have started. I know that there were other Rose Mahlers that immigrated to America, but to my knowledge, none of them ever painted once they got here. And he did. And because he was in such a Norwegian community, it was able to flourish. And there were people who were interested. And because of that interest, and because he sold in Chicago, and because there was a man called Dean Madden who saw some of that work in Chicago and eventually connected with Vesterheim, they started to bring over the Norwegian teachers. And I I think anyone in America who is painting, we're all part of his legacy.
What do you think like Rosemaling has meant to the Norwegian American community in the US?
I think it has it has meant a connection to the past. And I think Norwegian Americans are probably a little bit more romantic about the past, not really digging into the hardships that our ancestors truly lived with or under. So it's a connection, and it's a nice, sweet connection.
My name is Fredrik Kalstveit, and this episode was made in conjunction with Vesterheim and with the support of Norway House Foundation in San Francisco. The music you hear in the background was made by Jan Skogler.